Good morning, everyone. Reverend Ed Bove here, and I'm broadcasting from the Goodwin's Mills Sanctuary. You can see behind me some supplies that we are gathering uh, to go to some refugees that are in our area. And we've been working with some town officials to identify what they need. So we're going to be sending some exercisers to these families that have infants. And through a donation in the community, we even got some more items that the refugees could use. So more information on that to come in the next few weeks as we identify different needs in this way. Um, Today, we share and reflect on a very well known story, the prodigal son. The young son asks the father for his inheritance early. He then takes the money, goes away on his own, and he squanders that money, right? He lives the good life. He explores the world, and now he has none of the money left, and he wants to return to the father. So he goes back to the father, and the father welcomes him with open arms. The father welcomes him in and has a huge party for him. Well, there's an older brother, and he's been with the father all this time. He didn't ask for his inheritance. He's been working hard at home, and he kind of resents the younger brother because he almost feels like the father should have just rejected the younger brother. You know, you had the money, you squandered it, but he doesn't. The father explains that this son that was lost to me now comes back and is found. Most sermons on this story pretty typical. It's basically preachers will say a story that the young man went out into the world and he engaged in sin and debauchery and wasted his money and he made bad decisions and he came back and the judgment of the father should have been on him. Under the law, he didn't deserve anything and he should have been rejected by the father, but the father still accepts him in. And then the preacher would point to the fact that this earthly father is demonstrating what the heavenly father would do. In other words, extend grace and forgiveness. So the main lesson in those sermons are that you went out and you were involved with sin, you were involved with the ways of the world, you came back and God forgave you. So it's an appropriate Lenten sermon. God's grace wins in the end. You are forgiven. So you can come to God with whatever you have done, and you can experience the grace that the prodigal son has experienced. But I would like to look at this in a different way. The dynamics of the family. Let me share with you this picture. This is a great book that I would recommend, The Return of the Prodigal Son. The author is Henri Nouwen. And this picture is The Prodigal Son, The Return of the Prodigal Son by Rembrandt. And you can notice the father, leaning over the son. And notice the son has one lost shoe because they wore out as he walked back. He looks ragged. And the gentleman in the picture that's overlooking this scene is attributed with being the elder son, kind of looking on in judgment and in resentment. And then the seated folks are kind of equated with Pharisees, the law. And here is this famous painting by Rembrandt. So I recommend to you to get the book. A part of what Henri Nouwen brings into the discussion is talking about the dynamics of the father. And that's what I would like to talk in our life, in our family. Often, right, we I have this comfort that's in our family. We have brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers, and we try to go out in the world. And I would look at this story as we went out into the world, and the world's tough. You know, we had to work hard. We experience loss. We experience danger. We experience unexpected things happening. Perhaps we lost a job. Perhaps we had no money and had to find money to replace a tire that was flat. Perhaps we had an unexpected medical bill and we didn't know how to pay the ER. And we got a job and then that job didn't pay enough. And all of this stuff in life can beat us up. And we recognize often in our life that we there was other parts of our lives in the past that we didn't feel so beaten up, where we felt the nurture of a home, the safety of a father or parents, the love between brothers and sisters, and we were content. And now we can feel isolated. So we can certainly identify with the younger son going out into the world and experiencing all these things and wanting his old life back. And Henri Nouwen has us reflect on who the father is. Rembrandt himself went through a time similar, if you will, to the younger son in this parable. And as he paints this picture of the prodigal son's return, Henri Nouwen points to the fact that the father, from his own life, can understand the grace that he needs to extend to his younger son, the care and the love. And in the picture, the father is seen wearing a cape, and it's almost like the cape of God surrounding the younger son with forgiveness. The painter Rembrandt, the father in the parable, understands what it's like to go through pain. In fact, Rembrandt, at a period of his life, had to sell paintings. He had to sell his home. He had to sell his possessions to pay for debt. So the painting is an expression also of Rembrandt's pain. He identifies all too well with the younger son. So I recommend pulling that picture up to look at it on the internet and to read this book. There's a lot of insight into this parable. And the older son, you know, he deserves something, doesn't he? He's the hard worker. He's the one that didn't stray. He's the one that didn't squander the money. He's the one that doesn't need forgiveness because he has been so faithful to the Father. But within him, there is resentment when he sees the grace that the Father extends to the youngest son. So there's lessons in that to us. Do we put judgment upon people that God extends grace to? Do we truly believe in the words we say when we say, whatever you've been through in life, you can come to God and ask for forgiveness, and you will experience God's grace? Or do we hold some judgment in that, some resentment, because we've been solid in our lives and we haven't strayed and we haven't done these things? So we can identify in this parable with the younger son going out and getting beaten down by the world. We can identify with the father, perhaps knowing what life holds and knowing the need for forgiveness and for security for both of his sons. And we can identify with the older brother who's trying to be as faithful as he can be, but has feelings of resentment over what the younger son has been given by the father. This parable is so much about life. It is about, at one point in our life, knowing contentment, knowing security, not wanting for everything. And then we experience life and loss and pain, and we want our old life back. And when we come and ask with a humble heart, to once again be given those things: contentment, safety, security. We are given that. Grace is operating in our life. Perhaps from this parable, we realize that we didn't have it so bad after all. I think this parable speaks to what happens in our churches. We have built a consumer mentality in the churches. People come to the churches and want to be entertained. They want to feel secure and safe, and they want to have all their needs met. And when that doesn't necessarily happen, they go out to other churches, or they don't go to church at all, or they just simply stay home, or they separate themselves from the church. Uh, the church should be a place of contentment, peace, of faith, of joining together in a happy relationship. So if you're feeling estranged from the church itself, I urge you to realize what once was and work to create that for yourself and for others, to live into God's grace. And we all have to learn that we have to be less consumers and more just people of faith asking God in. I think this parable speaks of compassion and empathy. The father, in this case, has compassion and empathy for his son. No matter what the son's been through or what he's done, the father is ready to forgive. Perhaps, those sermons that I mentioned, the earthly father is reflecting the heavenly God that always offers forgiveness. And that's the bottom line to this Lenten sermon, that we can always come to God with our pain and our struggle and our trials. We can ask God in. We can ask for mercy, for compassion, for empathy, for understanding, for grace to be manifest in our lives so that we might find once again that inner contentment, that security, that lack of fear, that feeling of joy and abundance. The parable of the prodigal son, in many ways, allows us into many perspectives. The younger son, the father, the eldest son. Where do you fit in? Where do you most identify? How does this parable speak to you and speak to who God is? What insight do you have that you would share with someone if you were relating this story? I've been through this, and I asked God in, and I found myself at home again. I found myself connected. I used to go to church, and it was all about me, and I was thinking about how the church can serve me. I can see that now. And I went back with a new attitude. How can I offer grace to the church? And since I've done that, I have found a deeper relationship with God, with the fellow parishioners, and I live now more a life of service. When the younger son comes back to the father, he is ready to be of service on any level, as long as the father accepts him, right? So where do you connect with this parable? Story is so important. Art in the expression of our lives is so important because it gives us a depth of meaning if we only reflect on it and learn from it. What does the prodigal son teach you? What have you learned about grace? What have you learned about forgiveness in your life in the church? How have you offered that grace to others? How have you brought that which blocks you from God to God and say, God, forgive me? What are the things you need to do to be more connected? That's the Lenten question. What do you need to do to feel more connected to God? And I would extend that. What do you need to feel more connected to your church? And what are you prepared to do to manifest that in the life for yourself and for the church? Is it deep in your heart a desire to grow closer to a loving and a gracious God and to help others, to serve others, to be a person that has experienced grace and that extends grace? So today, we reflect on the power of this story of the prodigal son. For me, I can find myself in each one of the characters named. I can feel their struggles. I can understand what they're going through. And it deepens my relationship with God. It deepens my understanding of grace. It deepens my understanding of surrender. It deepens my understanding of what it means to be in service. It deepens my understanding of recognizing that I have blessings in my life that I need to celebrate, and to be focused on those. Um, so thank you for listening to this message today. Um, I pray for a deep connection for all of us with a loving and a gracious God in this Lenten time. As we move towards Holy Week and Easter, I encourage you, get this book, read it, The Return of the Prodigal Son by Henri Nouwen, Nouwen. It's a short book, it's a small book, but get it and explore more about this story of the son that returns to the Father. And I wish you a great week. And please join me in the prayer services that we are having. But thank you for being part of our church. And thank you for sharing all the gifts you bring to us. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you soon.